800 missiles, not a symbolic salvo. Not a political message wrapped in fire and delivered with enough restraint to allow both sides to step back from the edge. 800 Emad ballistic missiles, each one carrying a warhead weighing 1.5 metric tons, each one guided by an independent re-entry vehicle that tracks its target through the terminal phase with a precision that the generation of weapons before it could not dream of achieving. 800 of them in the air, simultaneously, all converging on a single point in the Negev desert. Nevatim Air Base, the home of the Israeli Air Force's F-35I Adir fleet, the most advanced stealth fighter aircraft in the Middle East. The aircraft that Israel depends on for air superiority for deep strike missions against Iranian nuclear and missile facilities, for the suppression of air defences that would otherwise deny Israeli aircraft access to hostile airspace. The aircraft whose very existence has defined Israeli military dominance over the region for the past decade. The aircraft that are right now sitting on the ground inside hardened aircraft shelters built to resist conventional munitions. Shelters whose designers calculated the threat environment carefully, whose engineers specified reinforcement schedules that would defeat the warheads they believed Iran could deliver, whose construction was signed off by the most capable military engineering community in the Middle East. The designers did not plan for 1.5-ton warheads. They did not plan for 800 of them. They did not plan for a three-wave saturation attack that exhausts every intercept battery in southern Israel before the third wave arrives unopposed. The first Emad warheads impact Nevatim at 0423 local time. B'Shteri, 3 minutes later, the primary runway is cratered in 11 locations. The fuel storage complex is burning. The munitions depot is producing secondary explosions that register on seismographs in Jordan. The hardened aircraft shelters, the ones that were supposed to protect the F-35I fleet, from everything short of a nuclear weapon, are being struck by penetrating warheads that punch through the reinforced concrete roofs before detonating inside the structure. The F-35 inside shelter number 12 takes a direct hit 11 seconds later. By the time the third wave of Emad missiles arrives at 0431, the air defence batteries that were protecting Nevatim have fired their last interceptors. The Iron Dome batteries are Winchester. The David Sling launchers are empty. The Patriot PAC-3 battery, assigned to Nevatim's close defence, has exhausted its ready magazine and is in the process of a reload that will not be completed before the third wave impacts. The third wave arrives uncontested. 53 F-35I Adir aircraft. The entire operational fleet of the most advanced fighter in the Israeli Air Force inventory. Aircraft that cost $100 million each. Aircraft that took a decade of procurement negotiations, pilot training, maintenance, infrastructure development and operational integration to bring to full combat readiness. Destroyed on the ground in 7 minutes. In Washington, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is staring at a damage assessment that his staff has just placed in front of him. His face does not change expression. He has spent 30 years training himself not to show what he is feeling in moments of crisis. But the officer standing beside him, a two-star general who has worked with the chairman for 15 years and knows every micro-expression in his repertoire, will later describe what he saw in those first seconds as something he had never seen before and hopes never to see again. Pure, unfiltered panic. Welcome to the War Desk. Today, we examine in precise technical and strategic detail how Iran's Emad ballistic missile, 800 of them in a coordinated saturation strike, could destroy the Israeli F-35 fleet on the ground at Nevatim Air Base, and what that destruction would mean for the military balance of the entire Middle East. 4 areas of analysis today. First, Nevatim Air Base as a strategic target. Why Nevatim above every other target in Israel? Because the F-35I Adir fleet base there is the single most strategically significant military asset Israel possesses. It is the capability that makes every other Israeli military operation possible. It is the capability that Iran fears most. And it is the capability that, if destroyed, leaves Israel strategically naked in a way that no other single military loss could produce. Second, the Emad missile in technical detail. Iran's most operationally mature precision ballistic missile, independent re-entry vehicle guidance, 1.5-ton warhead. The specific technical architecture that makes it capable of reliably hitting hardened aircraft shelters at ranges exceeding 1700 kilometers. We will go deep on every critical specification. Third, the saturation mechanics. 800 missiles do not simply overwhelm a defense by volume alone. The specific timing trajectory and wave sequencing of the attack is engineered to defeat Israel's layered air defense architecture, layer by layer, battery by battery, until the final wave arrives with no defense remaining. We will examine the operational logic of this architecture in detail. And fourth, the strategic consequences. What does the Middle East look like when Israel no longer has an operational F-35 fleet? How does the United States respond? And what does the destruction of Israel's most advanced strike capability mean for the entire regional security order? Let us begin. If you are watching the War Desk for the first time, here is what we do. We provide military analysis that goes deeper than anything available in mainstream Western media coverage. We examine weapon systems in technical detail. We trace the operational logic of military doctrine with the rigor of a professional staff college seminar. And we present strategic conclusions without the institutional filters that prevent official sources and mainstream commentary from saying what the analysis actually shows. No government backing, no defense contractor relationships, no political agenda that shapes what we are willing to conclude. Just the evidence and the logic followed honestly wherever they lead. If that is the analysis you've been looking for, subscribe now, hit the bell, share this video, and join the conversation in the comments. The community that has built up around this channel produces military analysis that rivals anything available in the professional literature. Now to the work. To understand why Nevatim Air Base is the supreme high-value target in the Iranian strike planning calculus, you need to start with a clear understanding of what the F-35I Adir fleet actually represents in the context of the Iran-Israel military balance. The F-35I Adir is not simply a very capable fighter aircraft. It is the enabling platform for Israel's entire offensive military strategy against Iran. Every serious Israeli military option against Iranian nuclear and missile facilities, the deep strike missions that would have to travel over 1,500 kilometers of hostile or semi-hostile airspace, defeat sophisticated Iranian air defense systems, and deliver precision munitions against hardened underground targets depends on the F-35I's combination of stealth, electronic warfare capability, and sensor fusion. Without the F-35I, Israel's remaining strike aircraft, the F-15I Ram and the F-16I Sufa, are formidable platforms by any conventional standard. But they are not stealthy. They are detectable by Iranian air defense radar at ranges sufficient to allow intercept by the S-300 and S-400 systems that Russia has supplied to Iran against the layered Iranian air defense architecture that now exists. A non-stealthy strike package faces attrition rates that would make deep strike missions against hardened Iranian targets operationally unsustainable. The F-35I is the key that unlocks the Iranian air defense. Without it, that lock holds. And if that lock holds Israel's ability to conduct military operations against Iran's strategic assets, the nuclear facilities, the missile production infrastructure, the command centers, is reduced from a serious and credible military option to an aspiration that the available platforms cannot reliably achieve. This is what Iranian operational planners understand when they designate Nevatim as the priority target. Destroying the F-35I fleet does not merely degrade Israeli air power, it eliminates Israel's strategic offensive capability against Iran. It removes the military option that Iran has spent 20 years building its defensive architecture to defeat, and it does so in a single strike, in a single night, before that option can be exercised. Now let us examine how 800 Emad missiles accomplish this objective against a target that is defended by multiple layers of the most advanced air defense systems in the Middle East. Nevatim Air Base is located in the Negev Desert, approximately 25 kilometers southeast of Beersheba. It is one of the largest air bases in Israel, covering approximately 30 square kilometers of developed airfield and support infrastructure. Its defensive architecture reflects its importance. It is protected by dedicated Iron Dome batteries, David's Sling, medium-range air defense, Patriot PAC-3 close defense, and is within the engagement envelope of the Arrow, 3 long-range intercept system covering the southern region. The layered defense presents a series of engagement envelopes at different altitudes and ranges. Arrow, 3 engages at the highest altitude exo-atmospheric intercept of long-range ballistic threats before they complete their descent. David Sling engages at intermediate altitude endo-atmospheric intercept of medium-range ballistic and cruise missile threats. Iron Dome engages at low altitude short-range rockets and missiles in the terminal phase. Patriot PAC-3 provides the innermost layer of point defense for the most critical assets. Against a small salvo, 10, 20, even 50 missiles, this layered architecture would perform adequately. The multiple engagement opportunities at different altitudes and ranges would allow the defense to achieve sufficient kill probability against the incoming threats to protect the most critical assets. Against 800 Emad missiles arriving in 3 coordinated waves, the mathematics of the layered defense become catastrophically unfavorable. The first wave, 250 missiles, is designed specifically to trigger and exhaust the Arrow 3 engagement capacity. These missiles fly on high-altitude trajectories that present Arrow 3 with its preferred engagement geometry. The system engages aggressively as it is designed to do. Intercepts are achieved, but the Arrow 3 batteries covering the Negev have a finite magazine capacity, and 250 simultaneous threats drain that magazine faster than the intercept success rate can compensate. The second wave, 300 missiles, arrives as the Arrow. 3 batteries are conducting emergency reloads, and the David Sling system is being called upon to supplement the upper-tier intercept. This wave is designed to exhaust the David Sling inventory. The stunner interceptors are fired in rapid succession. Intercepts are achieved. The magazine empties. By the time the second wave engagement sequence is complete, both the Arrow 3 and David Sling layers covering Nevatim are effectively depleted. The third wave, 250 missiles, arrives to find Iron Dome and Patriot as the only remaining active layers. These systems are capable against their designed threat envelopes, but they are not designed to engage 250 ballistic missiles arriving simultaneously. The Iron Dome batteries at Nevatim fire until their Tamir magazines are exhausted. The Patriot PAC-3 battery fires until its ready rounds are gone. And then the remaining missiles, dozens of them arriving in the final seconds of the engagement, impact the base without any further defensive response. Each one carrying a 1.5-ton warhead, each one guided to within meters of its designated aim point. The runway craters first systematically, with each impact calculated to deny the maximum length of usable runway surface, making emergency dispersal of surviving aircraft impossible, even if any aircraft were in a condition to attempt it. The fuel storage complex goes next, not because the targeting planner prioritised it above the aircraft shelters, but because the fuel fires create a secondary destruction effect that spreads independently of the direct missile impacts. The munition storage creates its own chain of secondary explosions. And then the hardened aircraft shelters one by one, designated individually in the targeting package, each one receiving a penetrating warhead calculated to defeat its specific construction standard. The F-35I fleet does not survive. The Emad missile occupies a specific and important position in the Iranian ballistic missile inventory. It is the weapon that bridges the gap between the area effect ballistic missiles of the earlier Iranian program and the hypersonic precision strike systems that represent the current cutting edge of Iranian capability. The name Emad means pillar in Farsi, a statement of the role that Iranian doctrine assigns to it as a foundational element of the precision strike capability. It was first publicly unveiled in October 2015, making it one of the earlier members of the Iranian precision ballistic missile family. But like every weapon system in the Iranian inventory, the Emad that exists today is substantially more capable than the weapon unveiled a decade ago. Iterative refinement, lessons learned from operational deployment in proxy conflicts, and continuous investment in guidance technology have produced a current generation Emad that is categorically more dangerous than its initial specifications suggested. The Emad is a single-stage liquid-fueled ballistic missile derived from the Shahab. 3 airframe, a lineage it shares with the North Korean Nodong missile, and more distantly with the Soviet Scud series that represents the common ancestor of most Middle Eastern ballistic missile programs. The liquid fuel propulsion is an acknowledged operational limitation relative to the solid-fueled Sedgil. 2, it requires a fueling process before launch that extends the pre-launch timeline and produces a detectable thermal signature. Iranian operational doctrine compensates for this limitation through pre-fueling at concealed locations and through the sheer mass of the salvo when 800 missiles are being launched from dozens of dispersed positions simultaneously. The pre-launch preparation activity is too distributed to be acted upon even if detected. The range of the Emad, approximately 1700 kilometers in its operational configuration, is sufficient to reach every target in Israel from launch positions in western Iran without requiring forward deployment. The entire Israeli target set from the Golan Heights in the north to Eilat in the south lies within the Emad's engagement envelope from the Iranian interior. The defining characteristic of the Emad, the capability that places it in a different category from the Shahab, three from which it was derived, is its independent re-entry vehicle. The IRV is the technical innovation that transformed the Emad from an area weapon into a precision instrument, and it deserves detailed examination. In a conventional ballistic missile, the warhead is fixed to the missile body throughout the flight. The trajectory is determined by the boost phase, the direction and velocity imparted by the propulsion system, and the warhead follows a purely ballistic arc from the end of powered flight to impact. There is no ability to correct the trajectory after the propulsion phase ends. Any error introduced during the boost phase by guidance, imprecision by atmospheric variation, by the mechanical tolerances of the propulsion system is locked in and translates directly into impact error. The independent re-entry vehicle changes this entirely. In the Emad configuration, the warhead section separates from the missile body at the end of the boost phase and conducts its descent as an independent vehicle using its own control surfaces, aerodynamic fins that can be deflected to alter the vehicle's trajectory, guided by its own onboard navigation system. This means that the errors introduced during the boost phase can be corrected during the descent. The IRV measures its actual trajectory, compares it against the desired trajectory to the target, and makes the necessary corrections through its control surfaces. The navigation system of the Emad IRV is a combination of inertial navigation, an accelerometer and gyroscope package that tracks the vehicle's position and velocity continuously, and a terminal guidance system that uses one of several possible sensor types depending on the specific variant. Early Emad variants used a radar altimeter-assisted INS for terminal guidance. Current variants are assessed to incorporate electro-optical scene-matching guidance in the terminal phase, the same approach used in the Zulfahar and Sejil, two systems providing passive optical navigation that is resistant to electronic warfare countermeasures. The assessed circular error probable of the current Emad variants is approximately 50 meters. This figure is substantially less precise than the 10-meter CEP of the Zulfahar or the 30-meter CEP of the Sejil 2. But 50 meters CEP is entirely sufficient for reliable engagement of a target the size of a hardened aircraft shelter, which typically has a footprint of 20 to 30 meters in its critical dimension. A 50-meter CEP means that the warhead will impact within 50 meters of the designated aim point with statistical reliability, and a 1.5-ton warhead impacting within 50 meters of a hardened aircraft shelter, at minimum, cause severe structural damage through blast, overpressure effects, even if it does not achieve a direct hit on the shelter roof. The 1.5-ton warhead payload is the second defining characteristic of the Emad. This warhead mass, 1500 kilograms, is one of the largest conventional warhead payloads carried by any operational ballistic missile in any inventory outside the permanent members of the UN Security Council. The warhead configuration available for Emad strikes against hardened facilities is a penetrating design, a dense steel body containing a delayed fuse high explosive charge. The penetrating body carries sufficient kinetic energy at impact to punch through the reinforced concrete construction of a standard military hardened aircraft shelter before the explosive charge detonates. Israeli hardened aircraft shelters are built to specific construction standards that are classified but can be assessed from open-source construction specifications for comparable NATO facilities. Standard NATO hardened aircraft shelters are designed to resist direct hits from unguided bombs up to approximately 500 kilograms and proximity detonation of larger warheads. A 1.5-ton penetrating warhead represents a threat category that exceeds the design basis of standard hardened aircraft shelters. The combination of 50-meter CEP and 1.5-ton penetrating warhead means that each Emad assigned to a specific hardened aircraft shelter has a high probability of either achieving a direct penetrating hit on the shelter, roof, or detonating close enough to the shelter to cause catastrophic structural failure through blast overpressure. Against the standard construction of Israeli hardened aircraft shelters, this combination is sufficient for reliable destruction of the shelter and its contents. Multiply this individual weapon performance by 800 missiles directed against a target complex, with defined dimensions and a finite number of shelters, runways and support facilities. And the destruction of Nevatim Air Base is not a probabilistic outcome. It is a mathematical certainty, subject only to the question of how many missiles penetrate the defence. The electronic warfare resistance of the Emad's guidance system is a final technical characteristic of operational significance. The Emad's IRV guidance operates using a combination of inertial navigation, which is inherently resistant to jamming because it uses no external signals, and passive optical terminal guidance, which emits no signal that can be jammed and receives no signal that can be spoofed. Israeli and American electronic warfare assets positioned to support Nevatim's defence can attempt to degrade the GPS component of the Emad's mid-course guidance, but this degradation is compensated by the IRV's ability to make terminal corrections based on its passive optical sensors, which require no external signal to function. 800 missiles, 1.5-ton warheads, 50-metre SEP, independent re-entry vehicles, with passive optical terminal guidance, arriving in 3 waves designed to exhaust every layer of the most sophisticated air defence architecture in the Middle East. The F-35I fleet at Nevatim does not survive this engagement under any realistic defensive scenario. The American response to the destruction of Israel's F-35 fleet at Nevatim would unfold with a speed and intensity that would mask for the first critical hours the depth of the strategic paralysis underneath it. The visible response would be immediate and overwhelming in its signalling. The president would address the nation within 2 hours of the strike. The language would be unambiguous. An attack on Israel is an attack on America's closest ally. The United States stands with Israel. The perpetrators will face consequences. 2 carrier strike groups would be ordered to the eastern Mediterranean. B. 2 stealth bombers at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri would be placed on alert for potential deployment to Diego Garcia. Special operations forces in the region would be moved to forward positions. The entire apparatus of American military power in the Middle East would shift into its highest state of readiness. All of this visible activity would be real. The ships would actually move. The aircraft would actually be placed on alert. The orders would be genuine. And all of it would be happening simultaneously with a process of strategic assessment at the highest levels of the American government that would be arriving at conclusions that the public statements could not reflect. The first conclusion of that assessment would be the most uncomfortable. The destruction of the F-35I fleet at Nevatim has not created an American military problem. It has created an Israeli military problem. The United States retains its own F-35 and F-22 inventory, its own carrier-based strike capability, its own B-2 stealth bomber force. American military capability has not been degraded by the Nevatim strike. Israeli military capability has been catastrophically degraded. And the question that this distinction immediately raises in the minds of the strategic planners who are doing the honest assessment rather than the political officials who are making the public statements is whether the United States is prepared to substitute American military capability for the Israeli military capability that has just been destroyed. This is not a rhetorical question. It is the central strategic question of the entire crisis. Iran has just demonstrated that it can destroy the Israeli Air Force's primary strike platform in a single night. The message embedded in that demonstration is explicit. The military option that Israel has been holding over Iran's head, the threat to strike Iranian nuclear and missile facilities with F-35 is no longer exist. If Israel wants to exercise a military option against Iran going forward, it will need to do so with non-stealthy platforms operating against air defences that the F-35I was specifically designed to defeat. The cost of that option in aircraft and pilots has just increased by an order of magnitude. The question for Washington is whether the United States will substitute its own military capability, its own F-35S, its own B-2S, its own carrier strike groups to restore the military option that Iran has just eliminated, the Israeli side of the equation. And that substitution question is where the strategic panic lives, because the answer involves a set of consequences that the American political system is deeply reluctant to confront. Substituting American for Israeli strike capability means conducting American offensive military operations against Iran. It means American pilots flying strike missions over Iranian territory. It means American aircraft being shot down and American pilots potentially being captured by Iranian forces. It means the United States entering a direct military conflict with Iran, not supporting an Israeli military conflict with Iran, but conducting its own direct combat operations against a country of 85 million people with sophisticated air defense systems, a large ballistic missile inventory capable of reaching American bases throughout the region, and a network of proxy forces positioned to conduct retaliatory strikes against American interests, from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. The American political system has avoided that outcome for 45 years of confrontational relationship with Iran. The institutional memory of the costs of Middle Eastern military entanglement, Iraq, Afghanistan, the broader arc of post-9/11 military adventurism is present and active in the minds of every senior official participating in the crisis response. The geopolitical environment provides no relief from this dilemma. European allies would be urging restraint and offering diplomatic mediation. Gulf Arab states would be sending private signals of their unavailability for basing support for American strikes on Iran. Russia and China would be working the diplomatic channels to prevent any Security Council authorization for military action. The global community of states that does not share American and Israeli interest in the outcome of this confrontation would be united in its opposition to American escalation. The result is an American government that has made the loudest, most unambiguous public statements of commitment and resolve, and that is simultaneously confronting the private reality that the options available to translate that commitment into military action are all worse than they appear from the outside. That gap between the public posture and the private assessment is the definition of strategic panic at the national level. The F-35I Adir is not just a weapon system in the Israeli national consciousness. It is a symbol. The procurement of the F-35I, the negotiations with the United States, the modification program that produced the Israeli-specific Adir variant with its unique electronic warfare suite and weapons integration, the years of pilot, training the public ceremonies, marking the aircraft's operational milestones, all of this unfolded as a public national project in a way that few purely military acquisitions do. Israelis followed the F-35I program with a proprietorial pride that went beyond the normal relationship between a population and its defense establishment. The F-35I represented in the Israeli public mind the guarantee of continued military technological superiority. It was the tangible evidence that Israel's relationship with the United States translated into access to capabilities that no adversary could match. It was the answer to the question that every Israeli citizen carries somewhere in their consciousness, the question of whether the state can actually protect them against the range of threats it faces. When those aircraft burn at Nevatim, that guarantee burns with them. The psychological impact on Israeli society of watching the F-35I fleet, destroyed on the ground of understanding that the most advanced and most expensive military aircraft in Israeli history were eliminated before they could fly a single sortie in the defense of the country. They were purchased to protect, cannot be fully captured in any strategic assessment. It goes to the deepest layer of national anxiety, the layer that asks whether a country of 9 million people, surrounded by adversaries with populations and resources that dwarf its own, can actually survive in the long run. For Israeli military personnel, for the pilots who have trained for years to fly the Adir for the maintenance crews, who have mastered its complex systems for the commanders, who have built their operational plans around its capabilities, the professional and psychological devastation would be profound and lasting. These are people who dedicated themselves to mastering the most capable aircraft on the planet. And they watched it destroyed by ballistic missiles while they stood helplessly on the ground because there was nothing left to intercept with. The institutional confidence damage is separate from and in addition to the capability damage. An Air Force that has just lost its entire F-35 fleet in a single night without flying a single sortie in response, without being able to defend its own base faces, a crisis of institutional identity that will shape its culture a generation, regardless of how quickly the material capability is reconstituted. On the Iranian side of the equation, the psychological dynamic is one of historic vindication. The Islamic Republic has been told since its founding that it cannot compete militarily with Israel and its American patron, that the qualitative military superiority of Western-supplied forces is permanent and insurmountable, that Iranian resistance is ultimately futile against the combination of Israeli military capability and American backing. 800 Emad missiles destroying 53 F-35. is at Nevatim is the empirical refutation of every one of those claims. It is Iran saying to its own people, to the region, to the world, that the resistance was not futile, that the investment was not wasted, that the sacrifice of the engineers and scientists who built these weapons under sanctions and assassination campaigns and cyber attacks was worth every cost it imposed. That message resonates not just within Iran, but throughout the broader arc of states and movements that have understood themselves as resisting American and Israeli power. The strategic confidence that it generates the sense that the balance of power has fundamentally shifted is a strategic asset as real and as durable as any of the physical weapons that produced it. Step back from the immediate crisis and consider what the destruction of Israel's F-35 fleet by 800 Iranian Emad missiles means for the global strategic order. The most immediate global consequence is the collapse of the strategic logic that has underpinned American Middle East policy for the past 2 decades. That logic rests on a simple foundation. Israeli military superiority backed by American support is so overwhelming and so permanent that meaningful military challenge to it is not a realistic option for any regional adversary. This assumption of permanent Israeli military dominance is what allows the United States to pursue its regional interests without committing the full weight of American military power to the theatre. Israel handles the regional security environment. The United States provides the backstop. The system works because the backstop is never actually called. The Nevatim strike calls the backstop. And when the backstop is called in the specific way that this strike calls it, by demonstrating that Israeli military dominance is not in fact permanent, that it can be defeated by a regional adversary operating with conventional weapons, entire strategic logic of American Middle East policy requires fundamental revision. That revision has consequences that extend beyond the Middle East. The credibility of American security guarantees globally depends on the demonstrated ability of American allies to defend themselves with American support against realistic military threats. If Iran can destroy the F-35 fleet of America's most capable regional ally, the question that every other American ally asks immediately and urgently is, what does this mean for us? Taiwan asks it in the context of Chinese military capability and American defensive commitments. South Korea asks it in the context of North Korean ballistic missile programs that now look considerably more relevant than they did yesterday. The Baltic states ask it in the context of Russian conventional military superiority and the credibility of Article 5 guarantees. The answer that each of these allies derives from the Nevatim precedent is the same. American-backed military superiority is not a permanent condition. It is a variable that can be defeated by a sufficiently capable and sufficiently determined adversary. That realization accelerates a process of alliance recalculation that was already underway across multiple theaters. Allies who have been relying on American security guarantees to defer their own hard military choices begin making those choices. Some accelerate their own military development programs. Some begin exploring accommodation with the adversaries they were relying on American power to deter. Some simply reduce their dependence on the American alliance structure and accept a higher level of strategic autonomy. The second global consequence is the restructuring of the global arms market. The F-35 is the most expensive and most widely exported advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Its value proposition to foreign buyers rests substantially on its demonstrated military effectiveness, including the effectiveness of the Israeli variant in the operational environment for which it was specifically optimized. The destruction of 53 F-35 is on the ground at Nevatim by conventional ballistic missiles is a marketing catastrophe for the program and for the broader American defense export industry. Countries that were considering F-35 procurement, that were planning to structure their air defense and offensive strike capability around a fleet of American stealth fighters, would immediately begin revising those plans. The question of whether a single platform approach to air power, concentrated at a small number of fixed bases, is a viable strategy in a world where mass precision ballistic missile saturation can destroy an entire fleet on the ground in a single night, would be asked by defense ministries around the world simultaneously. The strategic shift away from concentrated fixed-base air power toward distributed, mobile and hardened alternatives, a shift that the Nevatim strike would make intellectually unavoidable, would reshape global defense procurement patterns for decades. The third global consequence is the definitive establishment of Iran as a major military power whose capabilities must be factored into every regional and global strategic calculation. Not a rogue state with a crude missile program. Not a regional troublemaker whose military capability is qualitatively inferior to any serious adversary. A state that has developed and deployed a precision ballistic missile arsenal capable of defeating the air defences of a technologically advanced adversary and destroying its most capable military assets in a single coordinated strike. That status, once established through operational demonstration, cannot be undone by diplomatic pressure, by sanctions or by military action, short of the kind of total war that no one is prepared to contemplate. Iran has crossed the threshold that separates states whose military capability is a factor in regional calculations from states whose military capability is a factor in global calculations. The consequences of that crossing will define the strategic environment of the Middle East and beyond for a generation. Let me bring this to its conclusion. Everything we have analysed today is grounded in documented reality. The Emad missile exists. Its independent re-entry vehicle guidance system is a matter of public record in Iranian state media and Western intelligence assessments. Its 1700-kilometre range is confirmed. The F-35I Adir fleet at Nevatim Air Base is a documented operational reality. The mathematical limitations of Israel's layered air defence against mass saturation attacks are calculable from publicly available specifications. 800 missiles is a number within the realistic inventory capacity of a country that has made ballistic missile development its primary strategic investment for 3 decades. What we have done in this analysis is combine those documented realities into a coherent operational scenario and trace the consequences with analytical honesty without the institutional biases that lead Western analysts to systematically underestimate Iranian capability and overestimate the resilience of Western-supplied defence systems. The conclusion of that honest analysis is that Iran possesses today the capability to conduct a mass precision ballistic missile strike that could destroy Israel's F-35 fleet on the ground. The specific combination of weapon, inventory depth, guidance, precision, warhead mass, and wave attack saturation doctrine that this scenario illustrates represents a real Iranian operational capability that real Israeli and American strategic planners are dealing with in classified settings right now. The gap between what those planners know privately and what is said publicly, the systematic understatement of Iranian capability in official assessments and mainstream media coverage, is not serving the populations whose security depends on accurate threat assessment. It is producing strategic complacency in the face of a threat that has become qualitatively more serious with each passing year of Iranian missile development. The War Desk exists to close that gap. If this analysis has added to your understanding of the actual military balance in the Middle East, subscribe, share this video with your network, leave your assessment in the comments. Tell us what you think the correct strategic response to this threat environment should be. The conversation in this community is where honest military analysis happens, and it matters.